Welcome to Homegrown Tales, a live storytelling event held at Brews, 2 Pinets Spring in Eureka Springs. The following was recorded December 4th, 2024. And now here's Zeek Taylor to introduce the program.
Hello, and welcome. My co-producer Sandra Spotts and I welcome you tonight to Homegrown Tales. Sandra and I are thrilled to be joined by a guest storyteller and my best bud, John Rankine.
We're thrilled that tonight's musician is Tim Hillwood. Based near Eureka Springs, Tim is a solo guitarist who is mostly known for original and unique guitar instrumentals. The fingerstyle pieces range from melodic folk to jazz to new age and other genres that sometimes defy a label. These compositions generally come from an intention to uplift and inspire, and personally, they do. Tim's guitar playing draws on many influences and fills the room with a wide range of his instrument. Here's Tim. Zeek Taylor is a recipient of the Arkansas Governor's Art Award for Lifetime Achievement. Best known as a visual artist, he's also a storyteller and a writer. He's performed on the NPR show Tales from the South. A StoryCorps interview with Zeek is on file in the Library of Congress, and a segment of the interview aired on NPR's Morning Edition. He is the author of 4 books that include Chimps Having Fun and Out of the Delta, the anthology. Zeek has also done film work and has appeared in commercials, documentaries, a short film, and a full-length feature film. And I have to say, I asked Zeek not too long ago, I said, is this the busiest you've ever been in your career? And he said, yes. So I think that's the way to do it. So here's Zeek.
Before I read, I would like to read a list that I wish I didn't have to read. I acknowledge people that we've lost during the past 2 or 3 months, fellow Eurekans, and some of them as recently as this week. Chris Fisher, Tim Hilty, Pat Matsukas, Nancy Wines, Stuart Sawyer, Iris Samantel, Jill Hodges, Renaga Farber, Mary Jo Rose, Jim Fisher, Linda Harris. And I would like to dedicate tonight's show to Bob Packham, who passed away last week. Bob and Linda have been here for every Homegrown Tales show from day one. We're talking for years, except for one when they had to pick up their son at the airport. So I would like to dedicate this show to him. And I'm going to read a story that I wish I wasn't going to read, but I shouldn't say that. The reason for reading it, I wish I didn't have to. It concerns the trans community, which are under attack in our political climate. Bravery comes in many forms, and sometimes wears a wig. While attending the Memphis College of Art during the 1970s, a favorite hangout for many of my classmates was George's Drag Bar and Truck Stop. It was a bar on Madison Avenue. A couple of years before I moved to the city, the bar almost closed after some of the bar's drag queen performers were arrested for dressing in women's clothing. One of the performers faced an additional charge for kissing another man after the guy tipped him $1. Men dressing in women's clothes and men kissing men were against the municipal law. Following the arrest, patrons abandoned George's for fear of being arrested. No one at that time could risk the shame and stigma of being arrested for gay crimes and having their names reported in the Memphis Commercial Appeal newspaper. Fortunately, a judge threw the case out and dismissed all charges. The bar once again prospered. By the time I had moved to Memphis, George's was known as the showplace of the Mid-South. The bar was owned by George Wilson and his partner Don Rosignell, who often emceed the show as Danielle. The bar was a southern version of L'Acacia Fall. The avant-garde segment of Memphis society, both gay and straight, flocked to the bar. It was the place. The performers at George's, Fanny Farkle, Diana, Heather, Michelle, and others, entertained the crowds nightly. Not only did I enjoy them as performers, but I also became friends with several of the performers. I developed a close relationship with one of the girls, Renee, outside of the bar. I knew him as Randy and as a gentle, funny, generous spirit. I knew that Randy was also transitioning. Back then, I was not familiar with the word transgender. We used the word transitioning, or more commonly, we said they were having a sex change. There were other guys that I knew that were transitioning. One of them, Rebecca, was a real beauty, and she disappeared into the suburbs where she lived with her husband, a policeman. Another was murdered in Florida, not an uncommon end for a transgender person. Some of the others that I knew stayed in the gay community, and some of them continued to work in drag bars. Not only did Renee continue to perform, she became a public spokesperson for the LGBTQ community. She appeared in an HBO documentary on sex changes. At 6 foot plus, weighing maybe 100 pounds, and usually attired in extreme funkiness, leopard skin, and boas, Renee was out front and hard to ignore. She bravely ventured forth, unafraid of criticism or physical harm. She raised money, and lots of it, for the LGBT plus causes. Unfortunately, my last scheduled encounter with Renee was not to be. Long after I had left Memphis and was living in Fayetteville, Arkansas, I was scheduled to do a public appearance at a Dillard's store in Memphis, promoting my artwork. Renee got the dates mixed up, typical Renee, and showed up a day early to the store. I arrived at the store. There was a lovely note awaiting me from Renee, saying that she was sorry that she had missed me and that she loved me. I thought, well, next time. There was no next time. Renee died of AIDS at the age of 41. Renee was one of the bravest humans I've ever met. Fearless, strong, a warrior in heels. Renee, I love you. Sorry, I get emotional. Sandra Spotts has written for several Central Arkansas publications and has made 12 appearances telling her original stories on the internationally broadcast radio show Tales from the South. Sandra has a background in fine arts that began with work as a fiber artist. She has been an art teacher and has worked as a professional designer. For the past several years, she has called Eureka Springs home, where she continues her art career as an abstract expressionist painter. Here's my friend Sandra.
Thank you. This story is called The Rabbit. "You're going to eat this rabbit or you will never get up from that chair," Mama growled as she glared at me across the table. Tears began to roll down my cheeks and splash onto the mound of mashed potatoes like rain on a volcano. The tears only heightened her anger. "Eat it, eat it, eat it," she demanded. Sister sat stunned, dropping her eyes to her plate. I thought of the pet white bunnies I'd seen in hutches behind our neighbor Mr. Mack's house, the curiously tall Easter bunny that gave out chocolate eggs at Blast Department Store, and those darting, life-filled swampers and cottontails we'd seen in the woods the day before. Daddy finally intervened. "Let her alone. She doesn't have to eat it." I knew that he had just stepped into the fire for me. I could feel him looking at me knowingly as we waited for the explosion. That Sunday had started off with the usual routine of church, a lunch of leftovers, and my parents quarreling. It could be about money or who had taken on more responsibilities or whose fault something was 10 or 12 years ago, but most likely it would be about all of that. Doors were slammed and newspapers were thrown on the floor as the epithets flew through the air. Daddy had taken us girls the day before down around Stuttgart for a hunt and a respite from the marital issues of the week. I didn't like the hunting part, but I always liked being side by side with Daddy to watch him enjoy being in the woods. Every now and then, he would point over to the creek towards some wood ducks or down at deer tracks along the muddy bank. It was not long before Zorro, our family beagle, had jumped the trail of a cottontail or a swamp rabbit. He was a tenacious hunter, a quality admired by Daddy, who thought all dogs, family pets or not, should earn their keep. Before long, Daddy and Zorro had bagged 2 cottontails. Since Sister was the taller of us, she had the task of carrying the dead rabbits by their hind legs. I walked slightly behind, watching the lifeless, still warm bodies dangle and bounce with every step. Sister carried her burden with her lips tightened and eyes focused forward, always stoic. I followed the stream of blood from their mouths to the drops left behind on the clumpy dirt road. When we got home, Daddy skinned and dressed the rabbits. I watched every now and then, curious to see what was under the fur. I was intrigued by the pinkish skin with purple veining. But then the putrid smell of warm blood forced me off the chair I'd pulled up by his workbench. I went into the house to play with my dolls and thought about the cottontails and swampers and how fast they were running in the woods that day, except for these 2. I picked up my blue plush bunny, turned him over and over, trying to figure out how this toy was like and unlike those rabbits. I straightened the bow under his chin and put him on my side of the bed. The day had faded into evening, and the call to supper came. As I slowly walked into the kitchen, I reluctantly surveyed the table for the evening's offerings: mashed potatoes, gravy, English peas, salad. And there it was, something that looked like fried chicken, but with distorted parts. I climbed into my chair and filled my plate with the vegetables offered and began to eat. Mama, still in a state of agitation from the earlier quarrels with Daddy, stood over me with hand on hip and a deep scowl. "Get some rabbit. You don't have any on that plate. It's good." "No, thank you." "What do you mean, no? I said, get some rabbit." "I don't want any rabbit, Mama," I mumbled. Her voice became shrill and loud, and her small frame began to shake. She jabbed a fork into a leg piece and jammed it onto my plate, insisted that I had to eat it, and threatened that I wouldn't get up from that chair until it was all gone. And that's when Daddy took up for me and put himself square in the middle of the battle. Mama's ire rose. She does have to eat it. She's never had to do anything in her life. "This is what I spent my time fixing for supper, and she's gonna eat it," she screamed across the kitchen. "There's no reason she can't eat that rabbit, same as you and me." Daddy quietly and slowly replied, "She's only 8 years old, Mama. She's barely had a life. It won't matter if she eats that rabbit or not." "It will too matter. It matters to me," she screamed, throwing the wadded up dish towel toward Daddy's head. Daddy then tried diplomacy. "Shorty, why don't you go on and take a little bite?" I could see that there would be no other way to get out of this standoff or away from this table, ever. I sat up in my chair, looked at Daddy as if he were a turncoat. I tore off a piece of the meat with my fork. As I raised it to my mouth, Mama was distracted by the stove burner she had left on, giving me enough time to bury the meat under the mashed potato volcano as I feigned chewing. She sat down at the table, pushing back a lock of her jet black hair. "Now see, There was no need for you to be so stubborn, was there? It's good, isn't it? She settled into her chair and calmly filled her plate. Again, I could feel Daddy looking at me, and I knew he'd never tell. Yes, ma'am, I said, still chewing on air. During my lifetime, I have thought about the rabbits, the racing swampers and cottontails, the Easter bunny at Blast, and especially the fried one on the platter. I've also thought a lot about Daddy and how he gave in to Mom's orders. I thought about how people and even life itself bullied me with meanness, broken marriages, cancer, and the loss of loved ones, and how he stood up for me that day, tried to soften the blows as best he could. And I realized that when it's all said and done, Daddy showed me that I could find my own way to eat, or if I chose, feign eating the rabbit. That standing down isn't the same thing as losing. And thanks to Daddy, now that's not so hard to swallow. Once again, here's Zeek.
I'm going to read a story I've read before during the holiday season. No one dies, I'm not going to cry. So,
My next one's okay.
Christmas memories. When I was a very young boy, I claimed Reverend Fern Cook as my girlfriend. Miss Fern was the minister at the Methodist church that we attended. The church and the parsonage were across the alley from my family home. That location allowed me to have frequent visits with the good Reverend. If I saw Miss Fern in her yard, I would run across the alley to get a hug. During the Christmas of my 4th year, I was excited to take Miss Fern a present, an assortment of candies and cookies that my mother had made. I walked across the alley, carefully balancing the platter of sweets. My little dog Jigs was close behind. I knocked on Miss Fern's door. No answer. The door was unlocked. I decided I would go in and leave the gift as a surprise for my girlfriend. Jigs and I entered the parsonage and placed the platter on the dining table. It was then that I saw Miss Fern's beautiful Christmas tree. It was lit with bubble lights and decorated with lovely ornaments and sparkly icicles. I spotted real candy canes on the tree. I took one off the tree and ate it. I took another one from the tree and gave it to Jigs. I ate another one. Jigs ate another one. I decided I might as well take the rest of the candy canes home with me. The tree was quite tall, but I was able to reach quite a few to take back across the alley. I went straight to my room and laid the candy on my dresser. My mother came into my room and spotted the candy canes. She wanted to know if Miss Fern had given them to me. I told my mother the truth. My mother sternly informed me that I would return the candy and I would apologize for my misdeed. My mother kept going back and forth across the alley to see if the Reverend's car was back in the parsonage's garage. I sat on the couch and waited. Finally, Miss Fern returned home. My mother escorted me across the alley with candy canes in hand. Jigs stayed behind this time. I was concerned that Miss Fern would be mad at me and no longer wanted to be my girlfriend. That would have meant no more hugs. I was so relieved when the kind Reverend said, "I knew you were coming, and Santa and I placed the candy canes on the tree just for you." She then took the rest of the candy canes off the tree and gave the canes to me. On that day, Miss Fern taught me about love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of Christmas. Thank you. Our next reader is going to be John Rankine. John Rankine is a multimedia artist, photographer, and writer who originally hails from Toronto, Canada. He was co-founder of the Lovely County Citizen, a weekly newspaper, where he worked as a photojournalist and columnist. For the last 8 years, Rankine has curated rotating art exhibitions right here at Brews, an establishment that he owns with his husband, Bill Keene. A prolific artist, John has participated in numerous solo and group exhibitions, including the 2008 photo installation, A Community at Peace, which garnered him an Arkansas Arts Council individual fellowship and outstanding achievement of the arts. And he was the recipient of the first Artist 360 grant for his Men with Earrings photography series. And just last month, it was announced that John is the recipient of the Creative Impact Award from Artist 360. And I should add that, that award came with a $25,000 prize, so dinner's on. He's entertained us before, and I'm delighted to welcome John back to this Tell stage to share with us his talent as a storyteller. Here's the man I love, John Rankine.
Well, thanks everyone for coming out. Joe, a toxic tale of unrequited love, obsession, betrayal, guilt, resentment, anger, and loss. We met in Key West in 1987, sitting next to each other, stuffing envelopes for an AIDS fundraiser. His name was Joe, a distinguished-looking gentleman, 35 years my senior. Joseph Liam-Bruna was an artist, a fashion designer, and an international fashion photographer who, with his business partner and lover of 43 years, Jack Bodie, created the photography team Liam-Bruna Bodie. Google their names and up pops iconic fashion images from more than 4 decades in the pages of every major fashion magazine, including Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. I was 29, having moved from my native Toronto to Key West, Florida in 1984. It was the best of times and the worst of times, living in paradise, discovering myself as an artist, and opening up my own gallery on historic Duval Street. But it was also the height of the AIDS epidemic, losing so many friends to the plague. Joe and I partially bonded over loss. Jack Bodie died of a stroke 2 years before we met, and I became the caretaker of 2 close friends, Joe and Ralph, before they left us. Joe was a fascinating character and a great storyteller who had lived and traveled the world. He and Jack had led a jet-set life with an apartment in New York and a villa in Rome. He told amazing stories of meeting and working with designers Valentino, Saint Laurent, and Dior, of temperamental models and celebrities he adored and abhorred. Anna Magnani and Sophie Loren were the best. Shirley MacLaine, the biggest bitch. Lining his Key West apartment walls were some of Joe's paintings and sculptures, many of Jack's needlepoints, and lots of photographs. A large blown-up image of film director Federico Fellini with 2 young actresses hung above his couch. Joe became my mentor and a patron. He took great interest in me and believed in and encouraged me in my art. We started spending a lot of time together, often dining out at nice restaurants with him refusing to let me pay for anything. In my mind, we were just good friends, but the sugar daddy rumors had started. Joe had not picked up a camera since losing Jack and wanted to take pictures of me. As uncomfortable as it was, I was to be his muse. A little flattered but embarrassed, I let Joe dress me in clothes for the shoot I would never wear for myself. Flowy, romantic-type shirts and scarves, and then there was the fruit. Cringe-inducing photos of me shirtless in a hammock eating grapes. Luscious strawberries dripping down my chin, and the just right peach waiting to have a bite taken out of it. Shortly after the photo shoot, things began to change. Joe started to have strong romantic feelings for me. Maybe it was the age difference, but I had zero interest in Joe like that. He was like a father figure to me and not like a daddy in any sense of the word. I told him in no uncertain terms my feelings towards him, that an intimate relationship was never going to happen, and that I loved him as a dear friend. And then the letters started coming. Love letters, professing his undying love for me. Handwritten prose, sonnets, some long, some short, kept pouring out of him. Some touching, some overripe with cliches, some embarrassingly starry-eyed, always ending in, "Love Joe." Letters like, "The stillness of the night creates a void in this aching heart. Floating clouds play hide and seek in my garden of love. The night blooming flower showers a scent of mystery for lovers in love. bodies of white in embraces that the moon beams its heavenly spot upon. I lived the past of such nights in my garden of love, as we made love beside the stream that glistened like diamond facets. The heat of the night seemed cool to our bodies of burning desires, as the stillness of the night overhears the heartbeat of two lovers in love. Similar letters arrived almost daily, often accompanied by a dozen red roses. There was no end to the ribbing I received from my roommates as they answered the door to the bemused flower delivery man. Our living room smelled heavenly. In hindsight, I wish I had nipped these rose-colored letters in the bud, but was repeatedly reassured he understood my feelings for him. And in all honesty, there was some part of my unconscious, very insecure self that was attracted to the pedestal. Joe was headed for Rome for 2 months and wanted to take me with him. He would be staying with his good friend Peggy Cass, an actress best known for her role as Agnes Gooch in the stage and movie production of Auntie Mame, and a regular game show and celebrity host in the 60s and 70s. Oh my God, I thought Rome, and as much as I would die to have joined Joe, I knew in my heart I could not, knowing I could not lead him on, and that this craziness must stop. He wrote me every day from the eternal city where his obsession grew, and my frustration and anger peaked. I felt manipulated, and my empathy for Joe turned into undying resentment. Near the end, many of the letters were tossed in the trash, unopened. If I was to salvage this relationship, which did mean a lot to me, I needed to fully express my feelings and set some firm boundaries. No more letters, no more roses, and no more dinners. Joe agreed, and although it took a while, I became comfortable being around him again. My birthday was coming up, and Joe wanted to take me to New York to celebrate, to show me some of his favorite city spots and to introduce me to Carmen, one of his closest friends that still worked in the fashion industry. We visited Carmen in his studio. He made a wonderful lunch for us. We did some sightseeing, had dinner at a lovely restaurant, and ended the evening back at the Plaza Hotel. The room was wonderful, overlooking Central Park, luxury I had never experienced before. In the middle of the room was one king-size bed. Seeing the look of concern on my face, Joe began to explain that he had ordered 2 queen-size beds, but had to settle for the king because it was the only option overlooking the park. I was a little nervous and dubious, but I climbed into bed with him. And that's when it happened. Joe pounced. What happened next was a bit of a blur, but remember being in the hotel's lobby calling a friend, more like an acquaintance who didn't even know I was in New York, and asking if I could stay the night. I returned to the room the next day to silence, and silence remained for the cut-short trip and for the next couple of years. I had gone on with my life, met my future long-term partner, now husband Billy, and moved into a wonderful new art studio and started concentrating on my visual art. I'm not sure how or when, but Billy met Joe, and we started slowly communicating again. Having Billy by my side made it even possible. Joe had decided to move from Key West to West Palm Beach. With the loss of so many to AIDS, the Coral Rock Island had become a graveyard with too many ghosts. Before the move, Joe handed me all the photos he took of me, including the contact sheets, negatives, and slides. It was important to him that they were in my keeping and that I had control of it all. We talked on the phone every couple of months, and Joe would send me cut-out articles in the New York Times and other magazines on the arts and culture scene, always with a short note, and signed, Love, Joe. Shortly after Joe moved, we also made the big trek, leaving our tropical paradise for Eureka Springs, Arkansas. We did road trips back to Key West and always stopped in to see Joe, who was always pleased to see us both, although at times it was a bit awkward. The last time we saw Joe was in 2011, looking as fit as ever for a 94-year-old man doing morning laps in his unheated pool. I called Joe about a month after we got home, leaving a message to call me. I tried calling again, with still no response. Concerned, I called a third time, only to get a message that his phone was no longer in service. Alarmed, I Googled Joseph Liam Bruno obit, and up it popped. Ah, Joe, what an extraordinary life you had led, and I was glad, no matter how twisted and complicated it got, to be a little part of it. In retrospect, I think Joe, still grieving for the loss of his beloved partner, had projected parts of Jack onto me, breaking his heart by a heart that I could never fully give. I'm approaching 70, the same age as Joe when we first met all those years ago, stuffing envelopes. Looking back at that younger version of myself while sorting through the dozens and dozens of photographs Joe took, photographs I had not seen or looked at in years, I saw for the first time what Joe had seen in me, a slim young man in his prime who, despite his insecurities and self-doubt, had untapped talent with many gifts to offer. And for that, Joe, I will always be grateful.
Once again, here's Zeke with another story for us.
If anyone wants to write me a letter like was in that story John told, I'm not telling what I might do, but it could happen. Sears and Roebuck. When I was a child in the 50s, my first memory of Sears was when I looked through the retail company's Christmas catalog. It was known as the Wish Book, and it arrived several weeks before the holiday. Descriptive text and photographs in the catalog described every toy currently made that a child could possibly want from Santa. My sisters and I searched through the toy section to pick out our wants. We took turns looking through the catalog. We didn't argue over it in case Santa was watching and taking notes about impolite behavior. The wait for my turn sometimes seemed to be excruciatingly long. I thought, how long does it take my sister to look at an old baby doll? After days of studying the pages, we would write our names on the items that we wanted Santa to bring to us. Because our list of desired gifts always got out of hand, my mother requested that we number the items with descending numerals to denote our favorites. I made certain that number 1 that I placed on by my favorite toy was large and heavily circled. When finished, we gave the catalog to my mother, who turned it over to Santa. He then decided which toys to bring us on Christmas morning. The regular Sears catalog that came through the mail was much larger than the company's Christmas catalog. At one time, Sears offered mail-order kit houses for sale through the catalog. Even though the company stopped selling the kits in 1940, it still offered nearly every item an American household needed to furnish a home. Besides the usual clothing items offered, one could also buy appliances, curtains, rugs, furniture, tools, and more. The earlier catalogs offered many items that would seem odd to purchase through the mail in today's market. At one time, Sears sold ponies, donkeys, bees, and chickens. I longed to order one of the purebred animals shown in the catalog. Several popular breeds of dogs were listed, along with Siamese and Persian cats. No matter how badly I wanted a poodle from Sears, my mother said, "No, you have enough pets." When a new catalog arrived in the mail, my younger sister and I were allowed to cut up the old one and make paper dolls out of the photographs. We glued the cutout figures onto heavy construction paper with Elmer's glue. When the glue dried, we carefully cut around the figures. When my sister cut out paper dolls of girls and women, the figures I cut out from the catalog were photographs of animals. The first time I ordered using money I had made from picking cotton, I was 12 years old. I ordered a stereo that could play both 45s and albums. I wanted to begin collecting albums and get a head start on being a teen record collector. When I was 14, I used some of my cotton picking money to buy a red 125 Allstate motorbike straight out of the Sears catalog. It arrived in 2 large cardboard boxes. With my father's help, I put the bike together, poured gas into the tank, hopped on it, and immediately ran into a ditch. The bruises on my legs went away, but the dent remained on the fender and served as a reminder for me to be patient and cautious. Many of the items in my parents' home came from Sears. My father bought Sears Craftsman tools. My mother had Cold Spot and Kenmore appliances. We wore clothes from Sears. Some of the items were bought directly from the company's brick and mortar stores rather than the catalog. My family made frequent shopping trips to Memphis, and our first stop before heading to the city's downtown area was the Crosstown Sears store. The building that housed the store was huge and served as a company catalog, merchandising distribution center, as well as a retail store. The shopping area occupied the first few floors, and access from floor to floor was via an escalator. My youngest sister and I spent our time while there riding up and down on the moving stairs. The Memphis stores were favorite shopping outlets for Gladys Presley, where she picked out some of the furnishings for Graceland, the home of her son Elvis. She considered Sears to be upscale. My family did too. Years later, shopping in the Memphis Sears stores with my mother became a tradition on the day after Thanksgiving. At the time, writing a check required 2 IDs. A credit card served as one. My mother had a driver's license, and because she needed an additional ID, she reluctantly applied for and received a Sears credit card, the first credit card she ever owned. When we went to Sears in her annual holiday shopping trip, she would use her one and only credit card. She used it on that day and only on that day to keep the card active. She paid her Sears bill immediately the day it came in the mail. She didn't believe in credit cards, but she did believe in Sears. I eventually got a poodle, and it didn't come from Sears. I do miss getting the Sears wish book during Christmas and the time when I believed that being good was rewarded. Although nowadays it's not easy, I still think goodness will win in the end. Happy holidays. I now welcome back to the stage my friend Sandra.
This is called Christmas Gift. In my 10 years of Christmases, this had never happened. Roads were snowy enough to cause Grandma, Grandpa, and Mama, their daughter, concern. The drive from Pine Bluff to our house in Little Rock was only 48 miles. The winter weather created a challenge for Grandpa in his '53 Plymouth, the second and last car he ever owned, although he lived until 1980. Both thoughts of Christmas without my grandparents and their spending the holiday alone were unthinkable. Disappointment began to set in. My mother, who lived for all holidays, would not have either of those scenarios. So we loaded our car with gifts and food and confidence in Daddy to get us safely down the road. He fulfilled the task and delivered us unscathed to the door where 2 smiling elders stood to greet us. Grandpa's twinkling blue eyes and Grandma's giggles assured us these two could be mistaken for Santa's elves on any day of the year. I was lucky to have the quintessential jolly grandparents who never scolded and thought their girls could do no wrong. They'd been busy bees between the time the plan changed and our arrival. With a mixture of excitement, pride, and childhood memories, they led us into the living room. There on a table stood a pine sapling aglow with real candles, ornaments made from whole apples and oranges, and hand-strung cranberry garland. It was all at once a mixture of intense beauty and simplicity. They had recreated a Christmas tree just as they had experienced on the Grand Prairie in their German immigrant Arkansas town. I glanced at my grandparents as the glow spread over their old faces, full of childlike wonder. "Christmas gift," Grandpa said softly. He explained that was the greeting his family had traditionally exchanged instead of Merry Christmas. Fond recollections of childhood Christmases no doubt floated through their heads. Sister and I took turns reciting our verses that were to be a part of the children's program at our home church. We hung 2 of Grandpa's woolen hunting socks at their mantle, the one he had made, even though we were old enough to know how they would be filled. We still wanted to play the game. The dinner Mama had transported from home was soon on the table, and afterwards we all loaded into Daddy's car for the icy drive to my grandparents' church. The mantle, so elegantly hand-carved by my grandpa, stood as a symbol of his unwavering faith and his humble gift from talented hands. He had also carved the beautiful altar in their church. I smiled as I sat next to Grandma and Grandpa, listening to their quiet, wildly off-key singing, full of simple happiness, love, and joy. This was truly Christmas. What they had joyously offered, a revisiting of their childhood, their love, their faith, our Christmas gift. Well, that is our show for this evening, and we want to thank you for coming. We really appreciate every time that you come. And the date of our next show is February 1st, weather permitting. Traditionally, February has been a little dicey, but we'll hope not this time. And here's Zeke again with a few remarks.
Yeah, thanks again, and we'll keep doing this as long as we can read, as long as they keep making bigger font. I'd also like to thank Brews again for letting us have the event here. And thank you all for coming, and have glorious holidays.
Stay listening to music.
You've been listening to Homegrown Tales, a live storytelling event held at Brews, 2 Pine Spring in Eureka Springs. Join us again next time for more Homegrown Tales.